This lecture will cover working with families from diverse backgrounds. In terms of working with diversity, we know that thinking about developmentally appropriate practice also includes thinking about culture, which is understanding where people come from and how those beliefs shape their way of seeing the world and their interactions with one another. Um, Culture, we've talked a lot about in this course. You've had a major assignment related to thinking about culture. There are a number of definitions for culture, but essentially it comes down to understanding that culture are the beliefs and practices which influence how we see the world and how we interact with others. And they're usually tied to our background growing up and to the groups which we identify with. Culture can be geographical. For example, I would say that there are some things that I do that are sort of classically Midwestern. It can be related to your ethnic or racial background. I would say that there are definitely some things that I do that are associated with my own culture, having grown up in the family that I grew up in and having two parents that were born in Latin American countries. Culture can be regional. For example, we might say that Northern Virginia has a culture of its own. Having moved here from somewhere else, I would say that that's definitely true. We're not always aware of what our cultural practices are. We sort of think, oh, well, everybody does it this way, until we come across someone who does it differently. In any case, our culture, it's really important to be aware of our own and to be aware of what other people's cultural values are. It's important to be open about that because individual children need for that to not be like an invisible thing. Children are working through identity issues related to their own culture, and if they feel like something's invisible, then they think, oh, maybe that's bad. All children need to learn acceptance of one another and of diversity. Culture impacts parenting, and in terms of teacher growth, we just don't want to be wildly afraid of issues related to diversity. You know, most people are pretty receptive to a question if it's sincere, but what happens if you are uncomfortable working with issues of diversity is then you can have like unnecessary freakouts, and then that does make people uncomfortable. For example, I once worked in a school that was fairly homogeneous, and then as it got diverse, some teachers didn't know what to do with that. So one day I was making copies in the copy room, and another teacher came in and said, oh my gosh, you will never believe what happened this morning. One of my children, her braid fell off, and there it was in the middle of the floor, and I was teaching and I didn't know what to do, so I just stopped, and I didn't know what to do. Well, bless her heart, that poor teacher, you know, she didn't mean any harm, but that poor, poor child. She must have gone home and said, Mommy, my teacher freaked out because my braid fell off my head. I mean, it really was not such a big deal, but to this teacher, because she had not had a lot of experience in diversity, didn't really respond the right way. The right response would have been something like, oh, pumpkin, pick that braid up and go put that in your backpack. And you know, and so again, thinking about knowing about diversity as a part of teacher growth, it just helps us so then we are more likely to be able to deal with cultural issues as they come up, or, you know, not be so worried or afraid either. So in terms of strategies for teachers, you want to examine your personal attitudes. This is why you have the autobiography assignment, because everybody comes to the table with attitudes. I have opinions about the right way I think things should be done, right, being, you know, kind of quote unquote the right way. But I do have personal attitudes. I have opinions about how the world works, and that stuff is definitely from my own upbringing, my own experiences. And then the next step after thinking about, well, who am I, is you think, well, who are other people? And to try to challenge yourself to find out those things, which is why you had the diversity paper. And then as you make that effort, I think that's really important that then people see that reflected in your classroom. When you have children in your classroom that are from some other cultural background, it's important to try to find out as much as you can about that other cultural background because it will help you to understand the child. And it will help you to establish an environment that's welcoming. And it will help you to open the door for communication about culture. So, sometimes things happen. Sometimes things come up. So what do you do when there's cultural conflict? Well, there are the four possibilities are listed for you here. The first one is you negotiate and find compromise. The second one is a caregiver changes their actions. The third one is a parent learns new ideas. And the fourth one is sometimes there is not a lot of great resolution of conflict. So if you have built a relationship with the parents, try to come in and hear what the parents have to say and try to see if you can find compromise on some issue. A lot of times issues that come up are related to observance of some kind of holiday or celebratory day or tradition that someone finds offensive, and the teacher didn't anticipate that. Or a lot of times things come up related to food. I will say that sometimes people have questions when it comes to cultural conflict related to holidays. Um, there are secular traditions for holidays and there are religious traditions for holidays. So Christmas, for example, I've heard some teachers say, well, but Santa Claus, that's not even Christmas. Well, it is. It may not be the religious symbol of Christmas, which has to do with the nativity story and the birth of Jesus Christ. That's a religious aspect of a holiday, but Santa Claus is definitely Christmas, and so are Christmas trees, and so are elves, and those things may not be associated with the religious story, but they are definitely associated with the holiday. So if a parent comes to you and says, we don't really celebrate Christmas, I'm seeing a lot of Santa Claus, I'm kind of wondering if you're going to talk about other holidays, then that would be an example of where you would want to look and negotiate and find compromise. Holiday stuff is really tricky. I think people get surprised around Halloween too. Some folks really object to acknowledging Halloween because for some folks they feel like, well, that has a religious connotation that they do not believe or participate in, and so they are uncomfortable having their child exposed to that. As I said, a lot of stuff comes up around issues related to food. So these are some of the things that you might have to deal with. Sometimes we change our actions. I once had a family come in and their cultural concern had to do with, it was kind of complicated. It had a lot to do with food, and they came from kind of a subculture that was very much natural and not using anything with preservatives, and they had very strong feelings about even educational practices, and there was kind of a whole host of things that they came in with. And one of the things that they said to me is that they did not feel that we should have any class parties because that was hijacking the instructional day for basically nothing, and that they did not feel that there should be any kind of sugar, no birthday treats, no Valentine's Day cookies, no end of the year cupcake, nothing, absolutely nothing. And so we had to really work together on that, and I would say I guess we did all four of these. We negotiated and found some compromise. So whenever there was a birthday coming up, any parent sending in a birthday treat had to let me know in advance so that I could let the rest of the parents know that there's a birthday treat coming in particular this family. I could let them know so they could sit down with their child and say, tomorrow there will be cupcakes in school, and that stuff is we're not comfortable with you eating what's in there, and you can't have it, and you need to not succumb to temptation. I mean, not that I would have given it to her anyway, but you can't have it. They wanted to have the conversation with their child. So that was something where we negotiated and found some compromise. And then we did do with the five senses, we had air popped popcorn and watermelon, and I made sure to get an organic watermelon and organic popcorn, kernels for the air popper, and that was a compromise. There's also some stuff that I just didn't do. I changed my action. So, for example, we in previous years I had done an assignment where we would measure with pieces of candy corn, and after we were done measuring with pieces of candy corn, each child could have one piece of candy corn. I just took it off. It went away that year, which actually, as it turns out, as a sidebar, you should know that candy corn oftentimes has peanut flour in it. But anyway, I took it off so that the parents wouldn't be concerned about the candy. Um, Parents learning new ideas. I would say that they did learn some new ideas in terms of instructional practices. I think they wanted the classroom day to be more free form and not particularly structured, and the type of program that we had wasn't really set up that way. And and I think they did learn some new ideas about the value of what their child learned in the classroom with me. And then there were some things on which there was no resolution of conflict. I think we just, in some ways we got through it. I think we treated one another with mutual respect by the end. Um, we did not start out that way. They told me in the first class meeting that they were looking to sue the school because people give out too much candy. So so by the end was definitely better than that. They liked me, but also in some ways there was not great resolution of conflict because I felt like the restrictions that we had to adopt in order to accommodate them were very restrictive, and they still felt like we were having, way too much party time. So sometimes there's not necessarily great resolution. Common cultural issues, and I mentioned this in the last slide: linguistic diversity and challenges, holidays, and the classroom curriculum. And ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what does working with diversity look like? And basically, what I'll say to you is this: try to be open-minded. Try to get to know the cultural background of the children that you have in your particular classroom so that you are prepared and can kind of deal with things as they come up. If you feel like something is cultural and it's being brought out as cultural, for example, if a parent says to you, I think you don't like my child because my child is such and such background, you need to immediately pull in a supervisor and have the supervisor meet with you and that parent. And you can say, I really don't agree with that. I really don't accept that, but I think that I can better hear what you have to say if I have my supervisor listening in. And if that parent suspects that you don't like their kid because of some non-changeable feature like religion or ethnicity, they'll be happy to have the supervisor come in and sit in on the conversation. Um, this this can happen, but don't necessarily go into that alone, because that's a very painful, very difficult thing to have happen. And I worked with a teacher once who, well, she was a team teacher actually, and she was very sweet, and she really loved the children, loved all of the children. I never saw any indication that she had a least favorite child, but one of the children told her parents, I'm comfortable with Senora Pecoraro, but I'm really uncomfortable with the other teacher. And that mom was convinced that my team teacher didn't like her child, which was not true to my knowledge and experience, and that it was associated with culture. She said, "You don't like my child because she's an X group," and it was awful. My team teacher burst into tears. I mean, I would too. It was very painful. And we brought in a supervisor and just really looked at how we could go forward, working with the children. And of course, I talked with the parent, because the parent couldn't say enough nice things about me, which was horrible, horrible, because that was not um, anything I did either. That was because she felt connected to me culturally, and that was very unfair to my team teacher. And I, I told her that actually, and she did, but she was having none of it. She said, "Oh, you just think that because you're so nice." So, in the previous slide when I told you sometimes there's no resolution, sometimes there's no resolution. But if you do your best to try to know the kids in your classroom, to try to know the situation, then sometimes, most of the time, you can really come to some common ground.